This week on The Inside Story, NATO, past and present. Leaders from the world's largest military alliance meet in Lithuania and pledge allegiance to an ally at war.
We will not waver. I mean that. Our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken.
As NATO expands on the doorstep of Russia's aggression. How did it all begin? And what's next for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Now on The Inside Story, NATO, past and present.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Pursuti, VOA Senior Washington Correspondent. Welcome to The Inside Story. This week we take a closer look at NATO from its beginning in the 1940s as a 12-nation united front against Soviet expansion to its role in the world today as a 31-nation mega alliance. Is NATO today making the world a safer place or creating tension with an increasingly isolated Russia? NATO's past and present today on The Inside Story. President Biden wrapped up his two-day summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, with a speech emphasizing the allies' commitment to defend democracy and to address global challenges. He then made a stop in Finland to meet with NATO's newest member, confirming a, quote, rock-solid commitment to the Nordic nation. The president also addressed the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, reaffirming the U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and called on Russia to end its occupation of Crimea. VOA's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara was with the president on this trip.
Optimistic resolve for Ukraine?
We will not waver. We will not waver. I mean that. Our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes.
And a stern warning to Moscow.
Putin still wrongly believes that he can outlast Ukraine. He can't believe it's their land, their country, and their future. And even after all this time, Putin still doubts our staying power. He's still making a bad bet.
Twin messages from U.S. President Joe Biden in his parting words from what he called a historic NATO summit in Lithuania's capital that saw renewed support for Kyiv to join the alliance, but no specific commitments or timeline that Ukraine seeks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at the close of the NATO meeting.
I think at the end of summit we had great unity from our leaders and security guarantees that the success for this summit. I think so.
Zelensky, who has crisscrossed the planet in the past year to rally Western support, defended Washington's decision to provide Kyiv with cluster munitions, weapons banned by more than 120 countries for their indiscriminate killing capability.
Russia constantly uses cluster munitions on our territory, fights exclusively on our land, kills our people, and has continuously used cluster munitions for many years.
President Joe Biden swung through Finland's capital, assuring NATO's newest member of the alliance's commitment. He sought to calm European fears that a change in U.S. administration may mean uncertain transatlantic ties.
I absolutely guarantee it. There is no question. There's overwhelming support from the American people.
Biden's predecessor, Donald Trump, once called NATO obsolete, creating anxiety among allies. Now there are two more members of the alliance, with Sweden set to join soon. Finnish President Sauli Niinistö said the country feels more secure.
We have 80% of population supporting NATO membership and more than 80% who say that we will also protect our allies.
Protection from aggression by Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom Biden said already lost the war on Ukraine.
Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do?
That's another departure from Trump, who met with Putin in Helsinki 5 years ago and said he believed Russia did not interfere in the 2016 U.S. election despite U.S. intelligence evidence. In Helsinki, Biden also met leaders of other Nordic nations, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, who are all now NATO members. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Helsinki.
President Biden's NATO trip came at a time of increased tension between member nations and Russia over its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. To get a closer look at that and the administration's take on the summit, VOA spoke with White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby.
You just take a look at any of the strategic goals that President Putin said he was after. He wanted to wipe Ukraine as an independent country right off the map. He wanted to take out the Zelensky administration. He wanted to subjugate Ukraine and make it part of Russia as some sort of province. And he's achieved none of that. The other thing he wanted to do, and the President talked about this as well, was divide the West, fracture NATO, show that there's disunity among the United States and our allies. And of course, he's gotten the opposite of everything. Ukraine still stands and still fighting hard for their independence and sovereignty. They've clawed back more than 50% of the territory that Putin's forces were able to take in the early months of the war. And as for the West, NATO's now 2 countries stronger and has a longer eastern flank because of Finland than it ever did before. And now we'll be getting Sweden in soon. So he's not only not fractured the West, he's strengthened the West. He's made NATO more relevant, more purposeful, more powerful than ever before. And that's a real testament, not just to Putin's activities, but to President Biden's leadership on the world stage.
We've talked a lot about NATO as a security infrastructure for Western allies. But let's take a moment to examine what it is, why it exists, and how it evolved. Reporting for VOA, Tessa Stigler brings us the history of NATO.
This past week, leaders from 31 nations across the world gathered at the annual NATO summit. This year marks 74 years of the world's largest peacetime military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. NATO was formed as a shared defense, particularly against the threat of expansion by the Soviet Union following World War II. Originally formed in 1949 by 12 countries, they included Canada, the US, and 10 Western European nations. The North Atlantic Treaty was signed as an agreement to their mission of collective defense, political partnership, and economic growth.
If there is anything inevitable in the future, it is the will of the people of the world for freedom and for peace.
Since those 12 countries formed NATO over 7 decades ago, now NATO has grown to 31 nations. Over the course of NATO's history, the organization has played a prominent role in many international conflicts, including the Cold War and the war in Afghanistan, as well as international peacekeeping in the Middle East. NATO continues its defense and peacekeeping today, heavily involved in international security in the fight against terrorism. This annual summit promotes discussion between leaders and sets NATO's strategic future direction regarding international security and peace. This organization is meant to act as a democracy, making decisions on political and security issues as a collective. The 2-day conference continues that mission. For the Inside Story, I'm Tessa Stigler.
If you're wondering where we are, what you're looking at is actually the Embassy of Sweden here in Washington, home to what could be NATO's 32nd member, Sweden. This is more commonly known as the House of Sweden. It's located in the Tony neighborhood of Georgetown in Washington, D.C., right along the Potomac River. And as you'll see in the window, there's the Ukrainian flag with the hashtag #StandWithUkraine. Turkey is removing its opposition to Sweden's entry into NATO. As soon as Turkey's parliament votes, Sweden will join Finland as the 2 newest members of the alliance. For more on that and on Ukraine's NATO efforts, I spoke with Professor Jordan Tama, from American University right here in Washington.
The admission of Finland and Sweden into the alliance is hugely important. These are large countries. They have significant military capability. Finland, of course, is on Russia's border, and Sweden is not far away from it. And this strengthens NATO more than any other expansion of the alliance in recent years, and really shows how Putin's invasion of Russia has backfired for him. The other big headline has to do with Ukraine. Zelensky created a bit of an uproar right before the meeting because he tweeted that NATO was not bringing Ukraine into the alliance as quickly as he would like. But the reality is that the summit was very good for Ukraine.
Because of no time frame given for Ukraine, is the delay because the alliance's fears that they will be drawn into the conflict and they want the conflict to be over before Ukraine becomes a member?
If Ukraine joined NATO now, or if it joined NATO next year, the war would probably still be going on next year. NATO members would then be part of the war with Russia. They would be at war with Russia, because when you join NATO, it means that the members of the alliance are pledging to defend you if a country attacks you, and of course Ukraine's been attacked. So the thinking of Biden and most of the NATO leaders is that it would not make sense to bring Ukraine into NATO while Ukraine is fighting a war with Russia.
Professor, we just saw a report on landmines and unexploded munitions, yet the U.S. agreed to send cluster munitions to Ukraine. They've been banned by 120 countries, basically because they spread over a large area, they leave unexploded munitions. So why now, and why these weapons?
The reason is that the U.S. stocks of other munitions, non-cluster munitions, have been depleted, and the United States and Europe don't have other munitions available to provide Ukraine that could be effective for Ukraine on the battlefield.
Did that decision surprise you?
Well, I mean, it surprised me in the sense that, the United States has not used cluster munitions or favored the use of cluster munitions for many years, but we are now in an unprecedented, unexpected situation with the war in Ukraine, but it's certainly going to create some problems with, unexploded ordnance, and there's going to need to be a lot of care taken to try to minimize the effects that cluster munitions will, have on civilians in Ukraine in the years to come.
Professor, I'm going to ask you a question that we asked earlier in the show. Is NATO today making the world a safer place or creating tension with an increasingly isolated Russia?
NATO has stepped in to try to help Ukraine defend its territory and to send a signal to Russia that you can't get away with this, you can't get away with invading other countries.
So it's your view that NATO is actually holding Russia back from entering into other countries rather than infuriating Russia and escalating the situation?
Well, I mean, NATO certainly is infuriating Putin, but I think that is justified. And I think there's pretty strong, evidence that NATO is deterring Russia from invading other countries. Just if you look at which country has Putin chosen to invade, right? So Russia is next to Ukraine. It's also next to Latvia. It's also next to Estonia. It's also next to Lithuania. The key thing that differentiates Ukraine from those other countries is not that Putin would, find it desirable only to take over Ukraine and has no interest in also taking over other countries. It's that the Baltic states are in NATO, and Putin has not attacked any NATO country ever. So I think NATO is playing an important role there.
It's no surprise for the second year in a row, Russia's war with Ukraine was the hot topic among NATO leaders. After a year and a half after the invasion, landmines and unexploded munitions can be found in about 40% of Ukraine's land. The U.S. and other allies of Ukraine are assisting in demining efforts, with Japan allocating $45 million for the effort. VOA's Eastern Europe Bureau Chief Miroslava Gangadza brings us news of a Polish training facility that is assisting. There, she shows us how Ukrainian workers are learning how to use Japanese demining equipment with the help of Cambodians.
At a facility in Poland last week, specialists from Cambodia showed Arseniy Dyachenko and his colleagues at Ukraine's State Emergency Service how to use demining equipment. Dyachenko demonstrates how the Japanese-made advanced landmine imaging system, or ALICE, works.
You can see the metal object inside the ground, the special lines after the GPR scanning, and I think it's a PMN2 anti-personnel blast mine. It's digging more than 2 centimeters inside the ground. And if you look at the screen, you have to determine is it mine or it's just a piece of metal.
Advanced demining equipment and support are critical for Ukraine. According to Ukrainian government estimates, unexploded mines and munitions resulting from Russia's war on Ukraine can be found in 40% of Ukrainian territory.
Our urgence is PPE, personal protective equipment, demining machines, and especially metal detectors like the ALICE.
The Cambodian Mine Action Center is training the Ukrainian deminers. After sessions in Cambodia, the group traveled to Poland to finalize the training. Cambodian Mine Action Center Deputy Director Aung Famru explained that Cambodia has been dealing with the landmines and unexploded ordnance resulting from the nearly 3 decades of war that ended in the late 1990s. Over the past decade, the experienced Cambodian deminers have worked in numerous countries in Africa and the Middle East.
Ukraine has to have expertise, training, equipment, and support from other countries to solve the problem, because we can see that they will have a lot of problems after the war ends, considering the situation there. So I think it will be a big problem.
Despite aligning with Russia and China, Cambodia joined nearly 100 United Nations member countries in co-sponsoring a resolution condemning Russia's invasion. Cambodian specialists have been involved in a demining project with support from the Japanese government and developers. ALICE developer Machiyoki Saito said that Ukraine would probably require a substantial number of the devices in the coming years.
Even after the war is finished, maybe mine clearance operation have to continue maybe more than 10 years. So to speed up this operation, I really hope that ALICE can contribute somewhat.
Ensuring the safety of the land remains a complex and expensive long-term endeavor. Several countries, including the United States, Germany, Canada, and France, have provided demining assistance to Ukraine. Japan this year allocated $45 million to support demining initiatives in the Eastern European country. Recent estimates from the United Nations and Ukrainian Ministry of Economy suggest that cleaning the existing hazardous materials in Ukraine could cost over $30 billion and potentially take decades to complete. Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Legionovo, Poland.
Russia's decision to end the Black Sea grain initiative after the NATO meetings has left many countries struggling with food insecurity in a difficult situation. The initiative had guaranteed the free flow of Ukrainian grain to the world. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias explains.
Ships transporting Ukrainian grains to food insecure countries will no longer be guaranteed a safe passage in the Black Sea. Russia halted the so-called Black Sea grain initiative after complaining about the effects of Western restrictions on Russian food and fertilizer products.
As soon as the stipulated part of the Black Sea agreements related to Russia is fulfilled, Russia will immediately return to the implementation of the deal.
Turkey and the United Nations brokered the deal last summer to ease the repercussions of Russia's war against Ukraine.
This initiative has ensured the safe passage of over 32 million metric tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports. Hundreds of millions of people face hunger, and consumers are confronting a global cost of living crisis, and they will pay the price.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also decried Russia's decision as he noted that food prices have already jumped.
We'll look at to see what else can be done to find other ways to get Ukrainian food products on the world market, including, again, moving, as Ukraine's already been doing, moving things out through rail and by road. But in terms of the volumes necessary, it's really hard to replace what's now being lost as a result of Russia weaponizing food.
African countries already struggling with the effects of climate change will be particularly hurt by Russia's decision, said Kate Phillips Barrasso with the humanitarian organization Mercy Corps.
It's not just grain that's not getting out of Ukraine, but it's also fertilizers, which are really essential and required for producing food on a mass scale.
As the threat of hunger rises, another group is calling on the United States to ramp up its support for ongoing humanitarian efforts.
The US should get their checkbook out and make sure that they're saving lives through donating funds to these countries who need it the most.
Ukrainian officials told VOA that their exports will be badly affected by the Kremlin's decision, but that they will try to find other methods to distribute their products. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
After losing one leg during a military attack, Ukrainian soldier Mikhail Noravayko was met with the possibility of losing the other. His injuries defied treatment until a nonprofit organization flew him to the United States for medical care. VOA's Nina Vishnova has the story.
I was shell-shocked. Then I turned to the right and see my leg.
In October 2022, Mikhail Nalivayko's right leg was blown off in combat. The other became badly infected. The fighter for Ukraine's Air Assault Forces 79th Brigade spent months at a Kiev hospital where his leg injuries defied treatment. Finally, a non-profit called Revived Soldiers Ukraine brought him to the US for further medical care.
I had 23 surgeries and no result. I was asking doctors to amputate the second leg. Thought I'd manage 2 prosthetics faster than waiting for my leg to get better.
Now doctors in New York are fighting to save his leg.
No, you're gonna be here for a little bit. I'm sorry. One more left. Sorry.
Before the war, he lived in Mykolaiv and worked as a bartender. When President Volodymyr Zelensky announced national mobilization, he grabbed a backpack and headed to a military commissariat to sign up. Now, American doctors have inserted a titanium shaft in the leg and hope for recovery.
Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. He makes me want to come to work. He's such a sweet guy. Great manners, just a wonderful man. Yeah, and good guy. Great spirit. Great spirits. I hope that he gets better and gets to go home. That's the goal.
Ukrainian-born Irina Vashchuk-Desipio, the president of Revived Soldiers Ukraine, has been helping Ukrainian fighters since 2014.
Since 2015, we can manage to bring to United States over 70 soldiers. It's really hard to keep track of people because it's in and out process. This year alone, we brought 23 soldiers to United States, to various cities and hospitals.
So this isn't easy. The nonprofit raises funds to help soldiers in Ukraine as well. One of their centers operates in Irpin, and another is being built in Lviv. In the U.S., they operate in Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, and Orlando, Florida.
We found Mikhaila at the Kiev Army Hospital. He has a complicated case. That's the case where we're looking at amputation of one leg and saving a second leg from amputation.
From New York, Nalivayko will be transferred to a clinic in Orlando, where he will get his prosthesis. And after he gets back to normal, he'll return to Ukraine and resume his work as a drone operator. For Nina Vishnova in New York, Anna Rice, VOA News.
That's all for today. Stay up to date with all the news at voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. Follow me on Twitter at CarolynVOA and on Threads at CarolynVOA1. Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. And congratulations to Tessa Stigler on producing her first story on The Inside Story as our summer intern. For all of those behind the scenes who brought you today's show, I'm Carolyn Pursuti. We'll see you next week for the Inside Story.